All right, boys. Well, welcome.
Thank you.
So, as I think I told you both, treat this pretty casually, but the introductions are always interesting because I just let people introduce themselves because it's always more interesting than some bio someone would give. So, why don't you kick us off?
Yeah, my name is Ino. My full name is Innokenty Zavyalov. I'm Russian. That's a Russian name, but I just go by Ino for short. And I'm 31, and I've been racing bikes since I was about 19. I was a pro on the road for a little bit, and kind of during COVID, I switched things up, and I had an opportunity to race with a gravel team. And gravel cycling is a kind of a new discipline, at least on this level. Like, it's becoming a professional discipline. So I became one of the gravel pros, which probably sounds really funny to people
We can make a lot of fun.
who don't even know like much about gravel cycling or cycling at all. It's like, what do you mean gravel? But I'm sure we'll get into that.
We might.
Yeah.
Adam, how about you?
Does our introduction have to be factual, or can it be completely fabricated?
It can be completely fabricated, and then I will take a license to check anything that I feel like I need to.
I was told once upon a time, like, never let the truth get in the way of an entertaining story. So my name's Adam. I am 43. I have, according to my family members, I have the maturity of a 25-year-old. So I'm a long way from a midlife crisis. I've been a full-time cycling coach since, say, 2003, and work with a number of national champions, a number of non-national champions over the years. I believe it's 24 national championships in 9 disciplines now, 11 disciplines. It's a lot. And I love what I do. I am always willing to learn, and podcasts like this are really awesome. And I think that's mostly factual. So you can check it, and it might even be true.
Yeah. Adam is my coach as well.
Right.
Well, full disclosure, Adam works with both of us.
Yeah.
Which is sort of a silly waste of his time with me, but might be able to accomplish some things with you. So how did you two working together come about? Because I know that was a fairly recent thing.
Yeah.
I'm going to tell from my angle, and then Eno can say, this guy.
Again, we'll fact check yet again.
So I knew Eno when I was helping to direct the Elevate Pro Cycling team, formerly Think Finance, formerly Mercy Cycling, that some of the old school folks might know. And Eno was one of the riders that I always thought was a fantastic athlete, and to a large degree was pigeonholed as like being a TT rider, which I personally disagreed with. But since I wasn't the DS of the team, I could only talk to the DS and say things like, he can do way more if you give him the chance, which I don't know if that was ever relayed to you.
He just wore a look of sort of annoyance when you described that, as if he remembered those days. Am I right?
Yeah, that was a very difficult time, just because there was a lot of people. I had a coach that was kind of pretty controlling in a way, and then also our team director had a very specific way he thought about the world, and of course had to run this team, and so there was a conflict of my coach and the team director, and my coach was trying to like maybe run too much of what I was doing on the team.
And you were caught in the middle.
And I was caught in the middle. Yep.
Yeah.
So that was the annoying memory of being caught in the middle of these two powers.
So that was the beginning, and then fast forward a couple of years, like I haven't seen Eno in a while, and then he shows up at Ground in Nebraska. But I see him, and he's behind the desk, like basically volunteering, which was awesome. I was there because we support the event, and I thought it'd be fun to go do something new. And when we lined up, within like 90 seconds, I realized Eno was the best guy there by a lot. He blew our doors off. It was entertaining for a while because the group that I was in had a couple guys that were trying to rally the troops to say we can chase him and catch him, which was, to me, entertaining. I had to do some education. We are not going to catch Eno, no matter how hard we try. And that's kind of like reintroduced me to him, and then we talked, and here we are now. So did I get that mostly right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Totally.
Is that how you
Yeah.
remember growing up in Nebraska? Like just kind of hanging back, looking at the group and just waiting for your opportunity to strike?
Yeah. I wasn't super worried.
No, he could have created that opportunity whenever he wanted. He just decided to wait and ride with us for the first time.
Yeah. I mean, it's okay. So, I mean, I would love to give some context maybe throughout this of cycling. Is that fair? Because I mean, I've listened to some of the podcasts, and I don't think there's been too much cycling talk, right?
No, not at all.
So
Not
especially gravel cycling.
if you're going to do what I was preparing to do, that's great because no one wants to hear from me. So yeah,
Sure. Yeah. So ground in Nebraska is 130 miles.
Yeah, it's about 12 miles too long.
Yeah. It's a long race. And
You're welcome.
Most of these gravel races are really long. So riding alone for that amount of distance, it's mentally fatiguing, right? So, and it was really about half of the race with a pack. So that was definitely part of my strategy.
Well, you mentioned sort of the old days before, right? The early gravel days, and Dan Hughes, who manages Sunflower, who's nice enough to let us hang out here and do this. He's one of the legends of the sport, and I remember back in the day trying to chase him on a single speed. But there was a year when I assume Dan wasn't there, but Cameron Chambers, who was the 24-hour national champ at one point, was there. I don't know, like maybe 5 of us that were a little bit away. And he just turned around and said, "Can you guys hang for a while? Because I don't want to ride alone for 120 miles."
Yeah.
And if I'd been honest, my reaction would have been like, "No, I'm not going to stay here that much longer." But I totally understand not wanting to go solo that long. But it ends up being a long effort.
For sure. Yeah.
Well, in my experience with elite versus non-elite athletes is that at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. If you're good enough to be competitive with an elite level, national, international caliber athlete, you're going to be competitive. And if you're not, you're basically just delaying the inevitable, it's fun while it lasts, but don't even kid yourself. It's going to get really ugly at some point.
Yeah, exactly. So, but sort of on that note, you are one of those elite athletes, right?
Yeah.
And so you transition into gravel leading into this year, correct?
Yeah. So, I mean, last year, so right now we're sitting at the Sunflower Bike Shop, and we're in Lawrence, Kansas, and we're here. The 3 of us are all here for BWR, right?
Which is Belgian Waffle.
Belgian Waffle Ride, Kansas, which is a gravel event, or I should take that back.
Ooh, there's a debate.
It's
ready
not
to happen.
quite a gravel event, but
It's on-road.
It's on-road. Like it's off-road. There's going to be gravel. There's going to be mountain bike trail. There's like cyclocross trail. There's pavement. So it's kind of a mix of everything. But I mean, you're using a gravel bike, so it's kind of a lot of the gravel pros go do this event. So where was I?
That's okay.
Tangent.
No, so you've been having some very nice results this season.
Yeah.
And like we were talking and texting, just a couple of steps away from the top spot in a major race. And is that one of the reasons you reached out to Adam and are looking at a different program that's coming this year?
Totally. Yeah. So where I was going with the Kansas story, last year I was at this race, and that was my first like big gravel race in a long time. I got smoked. During the COVID years, I wasn't maybe racing and training quite as much. And then I just got hooked, and gravel is really taking off, and I really want to be part of it. So going into this year, I made a contact with the team I'm on right now, which is Mazda Lauf, and was able to ride for them. And that's just been super awesome. So they support me completely, and I'm able to go to all of these events. So like, I guess the answer is transitioning to gravel is kind of an opportunity for me. And I love it. Like I love the discipline, but it would not happen without the support, because it's pretty expensive. Like it takes a lot of resources, right? It takes a lot of equipment, and you're traveling all over the country every weekend, every other weekend. You're going to a different big race. So the team allowed me to become a full-time gravel racer, which is super awesome. And I really committed, and yes, like been getting top results. I haven't won a big gravel race yet, but I've been top 10, top 5 on the podium, like top 3. So that's been really exciting. And then Adam, yeah, we talked at Grounded Nebraska, and we kind of took it from there. And Adam invited me to be an ambassador for Source Endurance, which is his coaching company.
So what was it like to onboard Eno, given the fact that like you remembered him from back in the day, and now he rides away from you at Grounded.
Well, that's a whole different story. Like we're in the same race, but he's racing a different race than me. So
yeah,
it's just a different. Yeah.
But so like from a coaching side, as opposed to the rider side, right? Riding with him in a race, like was there anything different about the fact that you'd worked with him before, or did he fill out the same form the rest of us fill out, or how did that go?
He actually does fill the same form out because it gives you so much information. It's really good. There's no reason to have a second form and just make it more cumbersome to deal with. But yeah, I didn't work with Eno as a coach before on Elevate. It was more of like a assistant director standpoint. So I was privy to watching him be in the middle of some of the conversations / disagreements, but I wasn't able to do anything besides say something like he's very utilitarian, all the things he can do. Like let's use him for that stuff. But I remember him and how hard he worked and how like open has been to like processes that aren't necessarily what he's familiar with, right? So he listens and absorbs, right? And that's kind of like the perfect kind of athlete or client is someone who's willing to maybe do a little bit different, because a lot of our clients are like, well, what I've been doing hasn't worked great for me. And then on the flip side, some of them aren't willing to change what they've done. So it's like, that's a disconnect. So with this process is like someone who's willing to try something different, something like more effective than what they've been doing. And it's always interesting and it's always fun to work with an elite athlete or an athlete that's challenging their own way, right? So that's where we are now.
So were there any particular strengths or weaknesses you found that he had where you earmarked those sort of, these are the first things I'm going to start to address?
So you kind of look for like low hanging fruit, like what's the most glaring thing that we can work on, and then you can work on that. That's relatively easy unless it's not, and then it's an off-season thing that we work on. With Eno, my first impression was like he's really good at a lot of things, and if we can like shore those abilities up a little bit and reinforce some other things that I'm pretty sure he'd be good at given like proper training technique and proper like physiologic tuned training for him, he'd see some significant performance improvements, but also like walking him through the strategy of a lot of these gravel races, not the tactics, but strategy, because they're different, right?
You want to define the difference for people?
So strategy is kind of advantage, disadvantage, like global things that can affect the outcome. Things like the Tour de France. Tour de France is a really good example because there's all these stages where like a breakaway with 7 goes away. And that's a strategy these teams have to make another team work and chase, because in 3 hours it's going to matter, right? A tactic is like, don't overlap wheels here because you need to be able to get out to the left. And so you overlap wheels, you can't get out that way kind of thing. That's a tactic, right? That's a technique basically. So strategies in gravel racing are more simple than like your European road stuff. But they also have like profound effects if you execute them properly. And with Eno, just understanding at a high level some of those strategies that maybe he hasn't before was instant, always competing for podiums. And that was mostly like just making sure you were aware of some of the things that happen.
Are there a couple of those that like were a surprise to you when you mentioned those strategies? Or was there anything that was sort of illuminating in the sense of I almost wish I could try that tomorrow?
Can you give?
Yeah, so gravel races develop, a lot of the high level ones develop in the same way. Within the first 60 to 90 minutes, there's a primary split. And then after like roughly 3 hours, there's another split. And then within an hour and a half of the finish, there's a final split. And you're making all those splits. By that final split, you're on the podium, or you're competing for a podium. But you have to understand that if you miss that first split, you're either chasing really hard for 45 minutes or you're racing for 50th.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to make the first split.
Yeah. Yeah, cool. So to answer your question, I think, and kind of going off of what Adam said, I think the biggest thing that I've learned recently is knowing when to, and this is kind of elusive, but knowing when to go hard and when to go easy. And it's such a long race. You know, these races are 5 to 10 hours. And, you know, like you can't go hard the whole time. And some, like, we'll see riders coming in from the road. And especially like some of the really strong European riders, they come in, they go hard for the first 3 hours, like just hard, right? And I think you can't quite do that in gravel because yes, you'll make the first few splits, but then you're doing so much work that you're not going to be able to make the last splits. Like something's going to happen, right? Also, there's the thing, there's avoiding a flat tire, so you have to be kind of careful with your tires, your line choice, and sometimes like you have to remember to relax. Like I think that's one of the biggest lessons is like I will be in a certain situation where I'll keep repeating to myself, like just chill out, relax. Like this is not a time to react or do anything. Like this is not one of those splits that Adam was talking about.
And this concept of who like the Mayans were the first one to like identify zero as a value, right? And so for bike racing, this concept and the strategy of doing zero, like do not add to the workload, not add to your workload, sit in, watch, and do nothing. Like that's a legitimate strategy because it has a profound effect on what happens 2 hours later. Sometimes the best thing to do is do nothing.
Well, that reminds me of a story you told me during one of our conversations about Paolo Bettini.
Yes.
At Worlds. Do you want to share that with folks? Because it shocked me. Like a lot of the people that will watch us understand watts, even though they may be like football strength coaches. And the idea of saving watts, though, is counter, right, to a lot of major American sports, like in particular football.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
But can you explain that for folks, maybe from a metric standpoint as well as strategy?
One of the last times, I think Paolo Bettini won Worlds a couple times, and I saw one of his SRM files once upon a time. And he averaged, when he won, 156 watts for World Championships, averaged. He coasted for over 100 kilometers of the race. That is phenomenal.
Yeah.
That is like coasting. So we're in Lawrence, Kansas. That is like coasting to Kansas City and back.
Yeah.
That's about 100 kilometers round trip.
That's impressive.
Yeah.
So, you have 2 races left this season, am I right?
Mm-hmm.
Obviously BWR here and then Big Sugar.
Big Sugar. Yep.
And then you'll begin your off season from that point.
Mm-hmm.
Can you give everybody a quick overview of what your plans are in the off season? Because
it's
a fascinating approach.
Yeah, I'm super excited. So I'll be working with EliteForm, which is going to be a big change. I haven't done weightlifting in a while, since like 2019 maybe. And I always remember it being very helpful. So my biggest goal for the off season is to be really focused, not overdo it, not underdo it, just like consistent. And I would love to just get a couple of % better for next year. and then cycling a couple of percent is going from 7th, which is probably my average result this year, to like 1st, 2nd, 3rd consistently. So I would love to be in that position. And to do that, I'm going to go to Thailand. So I'm going to live in Thailand for about 3 months. They have a growing cycling scene. Cost of living is really low, warm weather, good food. Yeah, and it's a great place to ride, it seems like. I've never been. So I'm going in a bit blind. But based on my research, it seems like a great spot for a winter training camp. And I love the idea of like training camps. A lot, like fighters or certain
Rocky
athletes.
throwback.
Yeah, like they go somewhere else, they focus, they kind of shut out the world, and they just ride or train. So I love that idea. That's like very cool.
Have you had a client that's been halfway around the world that you've been working with like that?
I actually have a client right now who lives in Taiwan. He is there because of his wife's family. His wife is Taiwanese, I believe that's the right way. And so he's there for that reason. I believe his job is still related to things back on this continent. So there's like pretty significant time thing there. So he'll work like 3 or 4 hours starting from like 5 to 9 a.m. or something. And then he'll work on the back end like 8 to 11 p.m. So he's doing an awesome job. He's making a lot of sacrifices to make it work. But judging by like all the stories he's telling me and the things he puts on social media, like it's pretty incredible out there. So that's nice. Taiwan. That's not Thailand, but
still basically halfway around the world.
Still halfway around the world.
Yes, very far.
The Calendar updates will probably take a little bit more massaging to get your times right. But other than that, nice. So you'll be 3 months, did you say?
Yeah, about 3 months.
And have you already sort of began to plot that out, or are you only focused right now on I'm going to focus on these 2 races that I have left? I mean, obviously, I think about it a little bit.
Yeah,
there's got to be a lot of logistics.
Totally. Yeah. No, I feel some relief because I'm going with my girlfriend, Sarah, and we already figured out a lot of the logistics. So that's like a weight off my shoulders that I can now focus on these last 2 races. So we have our tickets, we have our places booked. There's like a cycling hotel. So there's a hotel for long-term stays for cyclists. And there's like a room for bikes and working on your bikes. Anyway, super awesome, right? Like that hints to me that there's great infrastructure for athletes. So yeah.
So then to kind of transition over kind of into more of that off-season conversation, and we've talked about this a little bit, but so you did lift a little bit before.
Yeah.
And it sounded, I believe you used the word unorthodox. Like you worked with a coach who had some unorthodox methods. What were those?
Totally. Okay. So yeah, I worked with a coach, and I mean, to his credit, I think there was like pushing the boundary kind of opened up a lot of ideas, and also just the consistency, right? That's the biggest thing, like consistency, hard work, right? The methodology is maybe not quite as important as the consistency, I think. But it was a lot of heavy lifting, low reps, a lot of like kind of made up, created free weight lifting styles to focus on the glutes to,
And was this in Minneapolis or?
No, this was in San Diego.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. You know the gentleman that
I-
you worked with?
He's a bit infamous.
He's infamous.
Yeah. That kind of
I've stumbled onto something.
Oh yeah, that all blew apart, and it was kind of an ugly ending. But I mean, when I was working with him, I was working very hard. I was very diligent, and I made it to a pro level.
There's something to be said for that, for sure.
So, yeah, but parts of it did not work well at all. We'll leave it at that.
I was going to say, fair enough.
Yeah.
We can make a transition. So, Yeah, one of the things that we'll end up doing right after Big Sugar is we're lucky enough, EliteForm is lucky enough to work with Kansas Athletics.
Mhm.
And you and I are going to go over to the Athletic Performance Lab with Dr. Andy Fry and basically start working on doing using velocity-based training to kind of predict what your 1RM is in every major lift that we would want to do from a cycling
So
standpoint.
he gets to see the interior of KU athletics facilities.
He does.
Super jealous. Because when I was at KU, they were just getting the football lifting center, whatever that's called, like up and running, and it was the best gym I've ever been in by a significant margin. And it's nothing but better now.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited.
Well, now everything on campus relates back to the Anderson family because I believe they did all the donations. So if you just say I'm going to Anderson, you can't go wrong.
Yeah, there's also like 17 buildings.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And actually make him show you the original rules of basketball too. Because you're going to be within 100 yards of the original rules of basketball.
Are you a basketball fan?
No.
There's always a dangerous sidebar with Adam and myself in regard to basketball, but if you're not a fan,
but it's the first rules, it's the first written rules.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a fan of sport in general. I just
That's
don't.
That's a good save.
I'm not familiar with other types of sport. Like I'm familiar with cycling, and that's kind of it.
That's focus.
I grew up without sport. Like I was not an athlete at all. I was like basically a full-time gamer.
Really?
Up until I was maybe 17. And then I managed to get into an art school, and that kind of saved me, I think. I was kind of a lost kid. Just a lot of video games, not a lot of studying, no sports at all. Like I would skip gym.
You didn't
class.
have like a Twitch channel where you were making millions of
dollars?
No,
I was playing Call of Duty 2 competitively though. Not professionally, far away from professionally, but I had a team and we would like do scrims. I think we call them scrims.
I think they're still called scrims, actually. Yeah, absolutely. I may or may not. Guilty pleasure. I play Fortnite competitive.
All right.
So
I played 007 on Nintendo 64. So
yeah.
And there it is.
I was good at Doom too. Those are like the original.
Oh,
yeah,
that's OG. Yeah.
So you're a gamer. That's an easy time to ask.
Yeah.
How did you end up on a bike?
Oh, that's a great question. So yeah, I was a gamer, and that was just, I think, mostly a way of just escaping school. And I mean, you know, if you went to high school and you're listening, like probably a good percentage of you did not have a great time. I did not have a great time in high school. So at least early, like middle school, early high school. So that was a way for me to like have community or whatever online, and you know, playing games is super fun. And I think I have a naturally competitive bug in me. So I think that was like a way to express that, to play competitive gaming. And then I started so I went to an arts high school without a school bus system. So like you get there however you get there, you're on your own. And for me, it would have been taking a city bus.
And can you tell people where this is?
Yeah, Minneapolis, Minnesota. Perpich Arts High, if you know Minneapolis. And I would have to take a bus to downtown. And this is Minnesota, like winter, right? It's like super cold. And then wait downtown for a transfer, take another bus.
Outside.
Right? Outside. Oh, yeah, outside.
Yeah.
So not fun, right? So I got into riding mostly to get to school. Like that was my kind of by necessity way of getting into it. And I just really liked it. You know, it allowed me to just go and ride, and then I would go and explore the city. I was in photography, so I would just take my camera, ride around. And I mean, it was such a freeing experience, right? And I loved it. And then I had a French teacher, and part of the class was watching like a stage of the tour or something like that. So we
Wow.
watched a little bit of the tour, and she was a fan. Like, she loved the tour.
Well, that's cool.
Yeah. So I got to see a little bit of the tour, and I'm like, oh, I ride bikes. Like, and I really paid attention and loved it. Like, I love the aesthetic of it.
Do you happen to remember like who was vying for the tour win?
I don't remember that one, but then on my own time, so this is 08. On my own time, I watched the Giro d'Italia, the Italian tour. And I remember that one very well, the 2008 Giro. It was the Russian Denis Menchov fighting against, who was it?
Conador?
No, the Italian rider. Also really good. Anyway, there was a battle between these two super awesome athletes. And I think both of them got caught, by the way. This is definitely the doping era. But at that time,
Almost every era is the doping era.
yeah,
but,
yeah. It's the end, maybe the end of the doping era. Both
of
of
one.
them served suspensions. But let's, for me, I was totally clueless to all that. And it was just such a show, such an amazing show, and so beautiful. And Menchov was in the lead, and then he crashes on the time trial bike on the last day and slides out, and he just has a few seconds to spare. He gets back on his bike super quick and makes it across the line and wins. And it was just so exciting, right? I was hooked. Like, and a Russian, like, I'm Russian, and bikes, and yeah, like, I was stoked. So I really wanted to find a way to start racing, and I knew how to Google. That's about it, right? I didn't know a single person who raced or even rode in like Lycra or even watched cycling. So I was on my own there, and I was able to find a starting program, like a class intro program at the local velodrome. We had a really nice velodrome track, which is like an oval track with really steep banks made out of wood, and you ride track bikes, which are a little different. And people race on a track. It's a very old way of
World
discipline.
Championships are going on right now.
Oh yeah, nice.
Yeah, Ghana just see Ghana set the world record. Took
Yeah.
Ashton Lambie's record today or yesterday.
In
Not
what,
at-
what event?
What?
Yeah.
In what event?
In the 4K?
Yeah. 4K.
He went sub 4?
Yeah,
In the
No
he
way.
did.
in the pursuit,
That's
4K
a
pursuit.
big
Yeah.
deal.
He beat Ashton's time.
He did.
His world
So
record?
hits the hour record, and then just a few days later breaks that.
No
Might as well just go
way.
for it then.
Yeah.
Just
I got this form. I'm going to turn it loose.
What?
he's got like the most aerodynamic setup ever, as far as I can tell. He had his bike 3D printed. Come on,
Yeah, that's really cool.
you got an extra
Wow.
$50,000. You can do that too.
Yeah. That's crazy.
Yeah, we.
So now there's 4 people who've gone sub 4 minute and 4 kilometer. Ashton,
Ghana.
and then the pair that were at Gravel Worlds are also in the sub
I did not
4
know
climb.
that. I
Yeah.
did
So
not know
the
that.
2 para athletes, they ride a tandem, and they set a 4K tandem pursuit. I don't remember. I'm sorry. But they're
We've
super
dropped into a nerd zone, but
yeah,
absolutely,
super
it's
awesome
cool.
dudes. But yeah, it's a big deal. Like, right, we're crossing into this kind of next era of cycling. I feel like with breaking this time, like it's a big deal.
Absolutely. So, but we still have what? So you start racing on the track.
Oh yeah.
So back to your efforts to break 4 now.
Yeah, and I was just really into it, and yeah, some early success. Just in the categories. So in cycling in the US categories. So you start as a 5 or a 4, so like high numbers, and you move up to 1. And once you're 1, the next level is like pro. And there's different levels of pro as well, a lot. So
It's not confusing at all.
Not confusing at all, no. And sometimes you're 1, but then you're race with the pros. Yeah, it gets pretty confusing. But
It's gray. I think it's intentionally gray.
yeah. So like in the Cat 4 and 3, I was pretty successful on the track. Made it up to Cat 2. Then I found this thing called cyclocross, just through some teammates.
So you went from the track to cross.
Yeah, yep. And it was a seasonal thing too. So track ends kind of when cross starts. And in Minnesota, like you're not going to be doing road in the fall, right? But cross, you can do cross, short events, high intensity.
How was the bike handling for you transitioning from track to cross?
Oh,
Had you just done enough
I
in the street
crashed
where
a
you
lot.
were good?
Yeah, I mean, riding a street helped through the snow, so I have that natural ability. I feel like just riding through snow and mud and sand, like riding through loose stuff, just because I've been doing that in Minnesota as just whenever I started riding. Yeah, so I did a little cross, and I totally burned out. Like I had no coach. I was in Boulder for cross nationals. Finished like 42nd or something, and man, I had no idea what I was doing. Like I was like riding a ton. I would get home and like eat chicken soup, like no carbs, right? I had no idea what I was doing, but it still managed to be like Cat 1 and cross, and
Your Cat 1 in spite of yourself.
yeah. So that was cool, but then it totally burned out. Like just didn't know what to do. I went on a long motorcycle trip out west then the following year and met my previous coach.
Okay.
Yeah. The one we talked about earlier.
Sure.
So then I moved.
Talked about what we're talking about. Got it.
Yeah.
So is that then what brought you back into the sport?
Yeah. After a short break, it gave me more motivation, and he gave me guidance. Like he gave me a direction, and I felt like, okay, like let me give this another like full effort, because now like I feel like I can just follow direction pretty well, and I don't have to feel like
We'll
I'm
check
on my
in with
own.
Adam about that in like 6 months and see
Yeah.
how your compliance is.
Yeah.
I have stories about that.
And then so in
With him
SoCal
already? Or?
No, just in general. But go ahead. I can tell my stories.
Yeah. So then SoCal, big scene for road racing there on the road, and racing is like where most opportunities are for professional racing and to get paid or get sponsored. So I mean maybe you guys can argue that, but and it's like the Tour de France, right? That's road. So,
That is definitely what the person thinks of road. Or thinks
Yeah.
road is. Yeah.
Right. And that is the height. And man, they get paid decent money. I mean, not compared
Would
to
you
like,
rather win a major tour or a one day? Like what race would, if you could just win any race?
One day for sure.
What one day?
Paris-Roubaix.
Roubaix?
Oh, Amstel Gold.
I think Roubaix just, man, it's so epic.
Roubaix is epic. Amstel Gold, I feel, it's got a lot of climbing, but not for climbers. And I feel like a lumpy race like that, and like one at Belgian Wall for Kansas, will favor just athletes. Which, I mean, I love cycling and the whole like special thing. I think in America, a lot of people that shouldn't be worrying about being a specialist want to be a specialist. And it's just like when I was running the team, I took this piece of advice from another friend of mine who actually ran the Jittery Joe's team for a couple of years. If you remember, anyone remembers that team from way back in the day. He signed Phil Diamond to his first contract. So now we're talking like way back machine. But his rule was, I will not sign anyone who did not win a race last year. Because if you can't win at home, you can't win anything else. And so that was always rang with me as being interesting, good like filter in general. And then also like, there have been a number of athletes who in America, we all look at them with admiration, right? And they're all athletes. They're not just, super climber, like TJ Van Garderen, super climber. There's not a lot of people that really follow and embrace TJ Van Garderen. For as amazing as he is, he's not like a fan favorite. The favorites that they are like the sprinters, who also like Tyler Farrar, sprinter, but he was also like in the front in these like Paris-Roubaix or someone, or like George Hincapie or those kind of guys who were just athletes, right? And it's something like gravel, you have to be an athlete. You have to have the upper body and the strength to ride your bike when you get sketchy, but you also have to have the overall fitness that just out pedals a lot of people that think they're climbers. And if you're a super skinny climber trying to go do like unbound gravel, like good luck. I mean, Pete Stetina is he's a terrible example because he's a climber by nature, but also he's a fantastic athlete too. And the guy will pedal really hard for a long time. And that is like world class. That shouldn't surprise anybody given his history in sport, that he's world class, and world class athletes are world class athletes, right? But anyway, that's why I like Amstel Gold, because it's for athletes, not just climbers, or not just like big dudes that can just plow the wind out of their way at all times. So
yeah.
Perry Bay has what, like 45 feet of climbing?
Really?
No,
that sounds right.
It's very flat,
Yeah,
but
yeah, that sounds right.
But if you include all the bumps, it's probably a lot from the top.
So you basically kind of hit this lull, start to get some guidance.
Yep. And then
how does that lead you to Elevate?
Racing in Southern California and getting some success there. I was racing in front of the team director a lot, right?
You were also influencing and deciding, unbeknownst to you. Paul, the director of Elevate, had seen you influence the outcome of all the races that you were at when he was there. So it's not like he just said, "Oh, this guy's cool, I want to pick him up." Like, to Paul's credit, he's very analytical in that sense. Like, he knows he needs a position player, which is kind of where he had you. But he needed someone with a big motor that could also influence races. Because if you can influence Southern California race to help determine the outcome, like, you can't do that without a motor, and you can't do that without being able to drive a bike, and you can't do that without understanding how the races work to some degree. And so he didn't see you as like, oh, here's a beginner that can pedal really hard, and we can shape him we can mold him to whatever we need. That part still existed, the molding part, but he saw you as like, here's a game changer and we need him on the team. So
cool. That's cool to hear about.
You earned the spot. It's not like you were, let's flip a coin between Eno and 75 other SoCal athletes, right? So think of it that way.
Yeah. Cool.
Went the last draft choice. This guy's still on the board. We'll grab him. Sounds like there's a little more to it than that.
Yeah. So. Yeah. I mean, sometimes I don't, as an athlete, you don't hear those stories.
And well, sometimes it's best you don't.
Yeah.
Right.
And sometimes even great athletes are the last one to be picked, especially for all-star games.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a sidebar we could get into. So backing up to sort of off-season training.
Sure.
This is more of a question for Adam. So when you're working with someone like Eno, who is right on the edge, right, of sort of challenging the likes of Pete Stetina, for a top spot, and they're planning a big off-season that includes strength training, and obviously a lot of time on the bike. How do you end up talking with your clients about adding the aspect of strength training into their program?
So some of it initially is like, you got to find out what they can do and what they can do safely. So there has to be some sort of evaluation. And since a lot of our clients are not with me, it either has to be done by video, which I'm not a huge fan of for something like strength training. I've also said, hey, go to this gym and pay a personal trainer to help you run through this like initial consultation, right? So spend that money so that you don't hurt yourself, or to like you at EliteForm and ask for that same opportunity for him. And then from there, the hard part is quantifying like to what degree strength training has as a training load or just an athlete load in general, right? A lot of athletes in October, if they've been racing all year, all have, I mean, if you're lucky, you realize you're like at the end of the season and you can make it. if you're unlucky, you kind of hit that point like 6 weeks ago and you've been running on empty the whole time. And you'll see those. If they're here, you'll see them on Sunday. Like they'll race the first half of the race and then they'll be like, I'm over it. Yeah. And then they may not even finish, right? Or they'll just be like, it's too hard. So managing that load throughout the season is really important. So that helps give you some idea about what the athlete can do long-term. So then if you can quantify the strength training, put it into that athlete load formula kind of thing, then you can keep them under that, like, I'm going to burn out soon threshold, and work them through the process that way. But it still takes time, right? If you're wondering if you're burned out at home and you did a bike race, say 3 weeks ago, and your bike is still in the case, that's a good sign. Okay.
Some telltale signs that have nothing to do with a qualified or quantified metric.
Otherwise known as every U.S. cyclocross racer that goes to Europe. When they come home, their bikes never get unpacked anytime soon. You know, you've probably seen it.
Yeah, I've never been over there for cross, but I can imagine.
So, Adam relayed there are going to be a few people that are sort of done before they start on Sunday. How are you feeling? Because you've done more than a couple of races this year.
I think this must be race number 24 or 25 this year, like gravel race. Not all races, just the gravel races. And gravel races carry a big training load. There's not as many pack dynamics, a lot more power output, more kJs burned, kilojoules, usually higher normalized power, average power. But I think working with Adam and just my understanding over the years as well of how important rest is. Like, we've been able to get here and I feel great. I feel really good.
Nice.
So I don't feel burned out.
But how many rest days have you had in the last 6 weeks?
Oh, a lot.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, I'll usually do like probably 3 easy days after one of these hard races. I think it's so important. Like, if I'm not fresh, like, I'm not going to train between these big races, right? There does come a time where you train when you're not fresh. But between these big races, that's not very smart, I don't think. Because the goal is the race, right?
You don't win anything in training.
If you're racing on every Saturday and on Wednesday you have intervals and you're cracked, and you try to push through those, just imagine how Saturday will go when you're racing for 6 hours.
Yeah. Well, you can't win without training, but you can't win anything in training.
Right. And to offer it on another scale too, do you guys know who Johan Museeuw is? From the Paris-Roubaix, the Lion of Flanders, the last Paris-Roubaix
multiple times.
The last Paris-Roubaix he won, the last one of 60 or however. He won a bunch of them. Everyone saw he won in this heroic fashion, right? Mm-hmm. But what no one else realized really was he didn't ride his bike for 10 days afterwards. Yeah. He finished, he sat in a chair, he drank, I believe it was a beer and then a Coke. And he didn't ride for 10 days afterwards. Yeah. Because he was that's the physical and emotional toll of that race to climb. Yeah. But you know what? Who cares? Yeah. He won Paris-Roubaix. Yeah. So, and the same thing goes for nationals. We have clients at nationals and they're worried about getting too much rest. This is a taper, on and on. It's who cares how you're feeling the day after? Because so many people are the week after nationals, I felt great. It's no one cares. No one cares.
Yeah. And we live in an era of data, and it's so easy to get wrapped up in that and look at I only did 15 hours this week, right? Which for an elite cyclist is not very much. And then you're I don't feel pro because of that. Well, I don't know. That's just getting wrapped up in the numbers, or looking at I want to hit a certain amount of miles this year. I see a lot of people focusing on that, and it's that's awesome, that's cool, but then how are your results in the race? And I think Adam's been kind of reinforcing those ideas in me as well. It doesn't matter how many hours a week you're doing. how are you doing in the race?
Well, that is definitely a double-edged sword, like in almost every context.
For sure.
Right. And like even with at my level, he has to put up with me comparing my watts to people like you. Right.
Yeah,
And
you can't.
And being disappointed. And he will tell me, you can't do that. Right.
Yeah.
And so understanding the value of when data has value, right, versus when maybe it's not the thing to worry about. Like, I've never quite understood I want to do X miles in a year.
Yeah.
That seems capricious and arbitrary to me, but
Yeah. But hey, like,
it's a thing.
If you're not racing too,
Yeah,
like,
if that's
a
just
great
kind
goal.
of a casual goal you have, absolutely.
It's like the 4-hour marathon finisher, the whatever that diagram. Have you seen that? The number of finishers, like for a 4-hour marathon, it should be a bell curve, right?
Mm.
But you have the 4-hour thing here. It's like a bell curve, and then there's this huge jump of people that hit the 4-hour, and there's a huge drop after that because that's their goal. They're like 4-hour marathon, 4-hour marathon, 4-hour marathon. And there are people like, I want to ride 1,000 miles a month on average, 12,000 miles a year, whatever, 10,000 miles a year, 6,000, whatever that number is. And that's their goal. And that's a legitimate goal. I don't think it should be one of many goals for the season. Not like, I mean, if it's a primary goal, it's great, but be upfront with yourself about it, right? I want to do 20 races, but I also want to I want to do 10,000 miles, and I also want to do 20 races. So then you have like 2 equally competing goals. And if you enter a race and finish a race, it's great, but you can't say 10,000 miles plus 20 races plus 10 podium finishes, because at some point you're going to start having conflicting goal sets, right? It's like, oh, I need to be on track for my 10,000 miles as an example. If you can do 10,000 miles a year, awesome. If you can't, like, your problem. But then at some point you need to miles, but you also have like 3 races coming up. It's like, oh, I'm going to ride 100 miles today, even though I race the next 3 days. And it's like, well, you can start and finish a race, but you're probably going to be garbage, which could be acceptable, it could not. But
yeah, one of the other challenges with data that we see is, particularly in like collegiate sport, is the data we produce almost gets used as a score. And so then it's really about, if all of us are lifting and we're all doing a hang clean and we're looking at peak power, I'm not looking at generating peak power because I'm calculating a progression over time and I'm worried about my own performance. I just want a bigger number than you know, right? And so that will change what happens in a weight room. And sometimes that's what the coaches want, right? Yeah. And it is like, you get a mid-season lull where everyone's feeling a little burnt out. It's a great way to light things up. Some of the best trash talk I've ever heard was when that was going on in a weight room with like the Cleveland Browns. But like, it's a matter of when do you use a particular metric for a particular value, right? And that's in some ways where we need someone like him to not get better of ourselves.
Motivating the athletes is a fantastic skill to know. Like what you said, if you're in week 12 and you're not going to make the playoffs and you're the Cleveland Browns, you got to motivate your guys somehow. And if that does it, that does it. And if it does it and then you start winning games afterwards, that's even better. So motivation matters a lot in athletics.
Absolutely. Well, you get into the cliches about how much of athletics is mental. Right?
Well, yes.
Some of those cliches are there because they're true.
It matters. So now you're assuming at the physical level, at the physiological level, when every athlete's the same, what can put you better is a mental motivational game. But it doesn't matter how motivated I am in a race. If Eno wants to hit the gas and like just leave us all, like there's no amount of motivation that's going to change that. So it doesn't matter at that point. But it matters when Eno's riding head to head against a guy that he beats 50% of the time. Then it matters, right? Like how motivated you are versus them. And that can put you over the edge, right? So that's why you have these teams that they always have, their talking points in these interviews, right? Like, that's a great team. I really respect everything they've done. they're a solid team, that kind of thing. Patrick Mahomes is great about that. The Kansas City Chiefs, and to some degree, like they also recognize they're professionals across the field, right? But if you have a guy that's like, yeah, I beat 16 times this year, I'm not really worried if I'm going to break away with him this time. Like all of a sudden, I guarantee you, Eno's never going to lose to that guy again, under any circumstances. Zero chance that's ever going to happen again. So the last thing you want to do is motivate a competitor that has the capability to beat you. But you also want to motivate yourself to beat it.
So do you have particular things that like you'll draw on that you find motivating? Like,
Yeah, I mean, I think in the race, it's important to be somewhat motivated, excited, caffeined up, like understand the course, like all those things, like be aware of who's there, what parts of the race are important. But as far as motivation, I mean, I think the most important place where you can use the motivation is training, right? Like that's where you can really, like that's where you're doing your intervals. And if you're not motivated, you woke up kind of late, or no, that's a bad example. Waking up late is great for an athlete, but if you just don't care, right? You don't care about your interval, and you're gonna go like 95, 98%. But if you're like really motivated and you understand that you only get a handful of these intervals per year, and you really hit it like a race, you have all your supplements, all your race food for the interval, then you hit it like 5% harder. And I think that's where you can really get a lot out of motivation, and that's where it's really important.
do you have any daily tricks? Like, are you a music guy when you ride? Do you have
Yeah.
like a interval playlist? Or
Oh, not really. I mean, I listen to a lot of podcasts. But when I ride, yeah, usually not music. Either nothing, like if it's a harder interval, I don't want to listen to anything. Or like, I don't know, some interesting podcast if it's a long ride. But I mean, I think racing a lot is important for motivation. So facing your competitors, understanding where you're at, seeing how close you are, right? I think in cycling, if you race really infrequently, you start to have unrealistic expectations, and they might kind of lull you to sleep. You might be really far from where you want to get to, and you're like, oh yeah, like I feel really good, my numbers are good, but then like you don't have that comparison to your actual competition. Like that's what matters, not the numbers. And I find a lot of motivation in racing, and then also like getting closer to my competition, right? Like getting seventh, and race getting sixth, and then fifth, and that's like so exciting to
sort of the tangible sort of places of a race, as opposed to whatever else you might see in training.
Yeah, and what you're doing too is you're mixing like subjective and objective measurements, right? So objective is, can I do these watts for this amount of time? And subjective, I guess, is how am I finishing and how do I feel, sort of deal.
Yeah.
And as a coach, like this is when you race a lot. It's good because we can see those subjective feelings and results, but we can also have the objective data, because you're not looking at the power meter when you're racing, not usually, but we can use that information to say like, this is where the training this is the direction it needs to flow. This is where you need to improve. If you're weak on like a 4-minute all-out effort, then we can work on that stuff, but we can't do like 4 workouts of them a week because they have like an enormous physical and emotional toll. Mm-hmm. I had a friend who I do not coach. I haven't coached him, but he had a bunch of those kind of efforts, and he called his coach one day and he's like, yeah, I'm really glad I'm not doing those anymore until next year. And that coach was like, no, you have them on your schedule this week again. And he's like, yeah, no, I'm not doing them again until next year. Like,
I'm telling you,
this isn't going to happen until next year. I'm done with
this. Is not a discussion. This
right.
is just a statement.
And so like, that's just emotionally, he was over it. Physically, he could do it, but yeah, like being able to use that hard data that you're generating in races and then applying it to training so that you can do better in racing is the balance as a coach. But then how does a coach allow you to race at your maximum level as often as you want to? Because if you're doing 30 races next year, that's 30 weeks. That's most of a year.
Yeah, that's basically no training. That's just racing.
Or it's training through a bunch of races.
Yeah.
But if you need 30 races to like make your season to get contracts for next year, then it's a hard ask, right?
Yeah, and that's an amazing thing about gravel, and there's just so much freedom. Like, yes, I'm on a gravel team, which is actually pretty rare. A lot of riders are solo, but I get to set my own schedule. I can do whatever I want.
So speaking of your own schedule, when we look to 2023, what are your targets? I'm sure you filled that form out too. So
yeah, for sure. I mean, I love the idea of a series. Kind of reminds me of maybe stage racing on the road, and just I love that, the tracking points, T time or like overall time. So I'd love to get into Time Grand Prix, which is one of the biggest series in gravel cycling. It also has a pretty good payout and really good.
Nothing wrong with that.
Really good competition. Yeah, really good competition. So I would love to see how I measure up in that series. And I'm considering, I got to talk to maybe Michael Marks. I'm considering doing all of the BWRs next year. I think that would be really fun. Just as a thing to focus on, right?
Yeah.
And then cutting out some of the other stuff. Because also, it's also a business, right? I'm a sponsored athlete, so I feel like being part of a series allows you to get kind of some traction with that, and they might use you more on social media. You're kind of more of a talking point, like, oh, here's Eno again, like here's what he did at the last race, and there's a theme and there's a story, and I think that's pretty important as well. So those two, Unbound, which is like the Super Bowl of gravel cycling. Amazing atmosphere, amazing race, like thousands of people. It's the big one, that one for sure. Gravel Worlds is amazing. Not the UCI, not the official Gravel World Championships, but
the real one.
The real gravel.
The real gravel.
Yeah, the underground.
The one that you get a saber if you win.
Yes, super awesome.
You get a jersey, but you also get a saber.
Yeah. Way cooler than a medal. So those, and ground in Nebraska, that's definitely one I'd love to come back to. I love the grassroots races, are really awesome. It's just a different atmosphere. You get to interact with people in a different way. So I really like that. But we'll kind of see. I mean, we'll see what the schedules look like, and then I would love to talk more deeply with Adam about that, of like, how do I still have time to train in between these races? So maybe having blocks of racing where I'll train in between.
It's definitely its own challenge, right?
Yeah, the logistics of something like that has to be challenging because, well, for example, last weekend there was a BWR in Michigan. So would you skip one but come to another, or try to do them both? I think that's a bit of a...
If you have enough advance notice, you can account for it. Like knowing you're going to do two of those things back to back like that, in theory, like you would hit Michigan like at the beginning of an upswing, right?
Yeah, maybe a little rusty.
Maybe not. It just depends on. I'd have to look a lot deeper, but basically we would look at like not 3 days of nothing afterwards. Like make it so you don't need 3 days. You need 2. The third day you were fine, right? Which someone like do that. Us too, like that's not on the radar, right?
Well, you're in a bit of a week that right now because you'll race Sunday, and then Big Sugar is a short turnaround to Saturday.
So in that case, you're probably good for that.
Yeah.
I don't remember your training schedule because I write it down, so I don't have to remember.
Yeah.
Which is why we're not testing for like 10 days.
It's this brilliant idea of like, writing. things like that's where books came from, right? You write it down so you don't have to remember it.
Yeah. No, I mean the end of the season seems to be pretty chill because you don't need to keep up your endurance, right? You can let things drop off a little bit and just keep things sharp.
Yeah, you're exchanging like sharpness for fitness, knowing that you can only do that so much, but as long as that point where you lose effectiveness comes after your last race, then you're good.
Mm-hmm.
Where people run into problems is they start doing that. They've not managed athlete load, which you know a lot about athlete load in your world. They don't manage athlete load early in the season, so they hit May, June, and they're already like beyond what they're capable of, and they have to do that scrubbing of fitness starting in June.
Mm-hmm.
They don't even realize it until like August when they're not able to like be competitive anymore. Or they are flat all the time, or they have to say like, oh, I'm taking all these races off because I'm just too tired, which is admirable because a lot of people wouldn't do that. They would just keep hitting their head against the wall, trying to race poorly, waiting for it to come around, in quotes, right? In reality, it's like, bro, it comes around whenever you decide to quit racing. So on one hand, they've mismanaged it early. They pay the price in the middle season, and they probably come back strong late. But they pay the price, right? And if you manage that like actively throughout the season, you never have that giant like nosedive, right?
Yeah.
So it's like I did that in a road season twice.
I kind of did that this year. Yeah, I mean after ground in Nebraska, I didn't ride for like 5 days.
Yeah, you need it.
Yeah, that was cooked.
And you can do that after you win.
And was that something you planned ahead of time, or you just like the next day like, I think I'm shutting down for a little bit?
I was self-coached for the last few years before Adam, and I mean I think for earlier this season when I was self-coached, I would focus on really simple metrics. So I focused on like getting focusing on hours early in the season. So like I want to get up to like a 28-30 hour week, training week, hit that, and then like back off the volume, and then hit some intensity, do rate, and then I basically raced myself into shape. And then after that, I would just focus on recovery. And actually, looking back on it, I think it worked pretty well. I just think I raced a bit too much. And at a certain point, I just blew up completely. Yeah. Fireworks. Yeah.
Yeah, but you weren't creeping the rest of the year. You weren't
No.
just going to keep trying.
Yeah. I mean, I knew it. Like, I felt it. I was like, okay, I'm really close to, like, I can keep digging this hole, or I can rest now and rest a lot and come back strong for the rest of the year.
You were also aided by having like a gap in the schedule.
Yes. Yeah. That really helped. Yeah. And like some life stuff, like I was like moving out of our apartment in Minneapolis. I was like, oh, perfect. Like I don't have to ride.
Because moving's not stressful.
Yeah. It sucked. Yeah.
And no one ever says, I'm glad I was moving.
No.
They're like, I'm glad I moved.
Just slotted in so nicely.
It's always past tense. I'm glad we moved.
Yeah.
It's never like, I can't wait to move next week or whatever. So,
yeah. Anyway.
So we got to talk about the vest.
Yeah.
So we messaged a little bit about
a
shared love of punk rock music. But,
yeah.
How did you get into the punk rock scene?
Yeah. So Minneapolis had a pretty big punk rock scene. And I had a few friends that were into punk in high school. And I was just really enjoyed that sound. And I was, this is the Bush era, right? This is like, let's see, like 05 to 08.
See, I tried to segue into this conversation with a playlist and training, but it didn't work because it doesn't listen to music.
Right. So it was a political time, right? And for a teenager, it was like, it seemed like it was a very clear, and like, I don't know, the Iraq War, and I'm sure people my age, like they remember that time as being like very clear politically of like what's good and what's bad, which now that I'm older, like those lines are a lot more blurry.
A little muddier.
but yeah, that was just a way for me to like express myself, and I love the music, and I also was into the political part of the music.
Who are some of the bands that you like or listen
Yeah,
to?
I really loved like more on the ska side, like punk ska stuff. So
Okay.
Choking Victim was probably my top band. Operation Ivy. I also really love the older like British stuff, Conflict, some of the like anarcho punk, more political punk, Craft, Conflict. Um, some of the West Coast. Um, yeah, but yeah, I can't quite remember.
Any new that you're totally into now?
Recently,
Yeah.
I listened to a lot of kind of like underground Russian hip hop. I really like it. It's very poetic. Also, can be somewhat political, or at least like social topics. Right. I really enjoyed that. It kind of connects me to kind of the Russian theme and sometimes the immigrant theme, or just like my generation of kind of seeing what's going on in Russia right now and maybe not being quite satisfied with it. I think Russian hip hop is what punk rock was for me when I was growing up
Interesting.
here. It's the same kind of expression, the same kind of, I don't know, disappointment or just expression of your anxiety and what's going on.
Do you also listen to like old school hip hop from the US or?
I like it. I can't say I listen to it a ton. Yeah.
I don't think Dr. Dre rings with him.
Well, but it could be something like Public Enemy, which they were
Yeah, no,
quite political,
I
right?
definitely listened to a lot of that in my punk rock years.
Dre. Not so
No.
much.
Yeah. So,
Gotcha.
yeah.
All right, you're gonna have to share some of those tracks with me.
Totally. Yeah.
Because if he gives me a long day,
You need
the
those.
earbuds are in for sure.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for doing this, fellas.
Yeah. Thank you.
So,
Super fun.
I think once you get back from Thailand, we'll have to do this again and that experience.
Yeah. And it was like using EliteForm. I think that would be.
Thanks for the plug. You kind of forced that one.
Well,
okay.
I think that'll be interesting because right now where I'm sitting, I know very little about it.
That's the best.
Yeah. So
You don't have all these preconceived notions.
Right. Well, and when we go through like testing, like we'll put it all into context,
Yeah,
right?
right.
Because the last thing, it goes back to kind of the conversation we were having about metrics. Like
Mhm.
you could say some things now and they would just kind of lack in appropriateness for what you were trying to get done.
Mhm.
And so some of it may be like Adam will talk about having someone be a bit better athlete on a bike.
Mhm.
And that is very much one thing that can be aided if you do it right.
Yeah.
So like Adam works with a friend of mine who I'm also trying to help. Shout out Jay Thomas. And like Jay's mobility, you can tell it's just directly impacted by all of the time he spent on a bike.
Mhm.
And so just getting him to be a bit more balanced
Yeah.
is kind of a starting point. And like we went through some very basic kind of movement protocols, and like he has a hard time, you won't mind me saying this, like
Mhm.
dropping into a squat and managing to keep his heels on the ground
Yeah.
because everything wants to fold forward as if you were on a bike.
If Jay becomes like what we would refer to as like a athlete, I mean, he would just turn back the clock even more for his whole like getting older thing. He's already like 50 is the new 30.
Peter Pan on a bike.
Oh, it's
Doing well.
Yeah.
Doing well.
Yeah, he's.
But so when we go through that work, right,
Yeah.
we'll talk about what it means, and then the way it can work best is if everyone's sort of on the same page together, right?
Mhm.
Because if you were a sprinter, we might be talking about something hyper specific like 5-second peak power,
Yeah.
right? And lifting can help with that, but then it would be a very specific lifting protocol,
Mhm.
right? Whereas like we put Unbound into the mix. We can't say roubaix. That's just right. Maybe a few. But if we put Unbound into the mix, right, we're not gonna necessarily like hyper focus 5-second power. That'd be kind of silly, quite frankly.
Right.
Yeah,
But
I just I think balancing and managing all of this as kind of almost like an ultra distance rider, long distance, maybe not ultra distance.
Mhm.
I think that is just fascinating, right? Like, how do you race, 20, 30 weekends in a year and also get good training, also get all the benefits of weightlifting?
Right.
So I'm excited to learn.
The image I have,
because
in my
I
head-
have no idea. You guys
Gotcha.
know.
Well, the image I have in my head for it, is think about the finish from there's a deep little kicker on pace right before you drop down into campus.
Yeah.
And I think if I remember, Ian Boswell attacked.
Mhm.
Keegan followed it, but I think Ivar dropped off but managed to get back.
Mhm.
So strength training definitely plays into your ability to hit that hard. So I already like to imagine you just kind of hitting it right there and gapping everybody and just finishing it out.
Sounds great.
So
Love it.
I'll just put that image in your mind and you're thinking about that all off season.
I love that.
Seriously though, thanks to you both for
Yeah.
coming on. It was a good time.
Thank you.
Let's definitely do it again.
All right.